Charles Bronson. I've been caged up for a quarter of a century. I've spent 22 of it. Solitary confinement. Prison drives me mad. Year after year after year. You gotta be mad to survive it. It gets into your blood. You start to smell prison. You eat it, sleep it, shit it. Prison is like a cancer eating away at you. Your life is inside the belly of the beast.
Physically picked me up above his head. That's how strong he is. And you've got to bear in mind that while he was doing this, he was like screaming like a banshee.
Anyone who don't know this think I've got a lump on my back and 2 heads, and I eat people.
A swarthy character with a moustache came into the shop. He pulled a gun from his belt, and I knew then that we had serious trouble.
He must be the most unsuccessful bank robber that's ever lived in this country. He's never got anything from any of them. He's always bodged them up, and I don't know why he ever tried them again, really.
He's a very sensitive person, he's very talented, he's very creative, he's very understanding, he's very articulate.
I've caught him a peach of a right-hander on the chin. As he's going down, I've caught him with a left, a right, an upper and another right. I've sparked him out.
And then he kissed me. He'd only ever kissed me on the cheek before. He kissed me on the mouth. In public, sort of.
He's not a hard man, he's a very soft-hearted man. But people don't know this, they only know what they read in the papers.
Okay, can we have a big hand, please, for Charles Bronson?
Charles Bronson was jailed for armed robbery in 1974 and should have been free 3 years later. Except for a few fleeting weeks of freedom on the outside, he's been behind bars ever since. But Charlie has never killed anyone. A quarter of a century in the prison system has changed him both mentally and physically. He is a man of many faces. At times, he is aggressive and dangerous, capable of incredible destruction. But Charlie, a prolific cartoonist, can also show great charm, warmth, and humor. How did Michael Peterson, a small-time criminal, become Charles Bronson, Britain's most feared prisoner? Charles Bronson was born Michael Peterson on December the 6th, 1952. He was the second of 3 brothers living in this modest council house in Luton. His father, Joe, ran a decorating business, and the family was respectable and law-abiding.
Beautiful child, very loving, just an ordinary child, but he was very affectionate and used to love having little trips out and things like that. Loved going out with his dad down the park to feed ducks and things like that. He was just a normal, happy child.
Although Ira remembers happy times, Charlie was beginning to have brushes with the law.
The police knocked at the door one day where they'd been caught. They'd been taking shoe polish, laces, stupid little things, what boys wouldn't have anyway. And they used to hide them in this lad's shed. And the police followed him this day, and that was the first time I ever known him to be in trouble. When he was in school, he didn't used to like being in a mixed school. He didn't like being in the classroom with girls. He never done serious things. He just played up the teachers and got cheeky and got expelled.
At 15, Charlie went for a fresh start to live with his grandmother at Ellesmere Port in Merseyside. His best friend was John Bristow.
The worst we got up to when I used to knock around with him was going around the back of shops, pinching the pop bottles, taking the bottles back for the money. That was it, like. There was nothing really worse than that.
Charlie found work in a range of labouring jobs in the area.
We were in the Bull one night. I think we went for a darts match, and there was these two girls sat down, and we got chatting to them, bought them a drink, and eventually we both married them. And that's how Mickey met his wife Irene.
I think he said I had nice big eyes. He was definitely a charmer. He was always very charming towards me and very gentlemanly. He never, did anything at all. He was very, very protective towards me and looked after me and opened car doors for me, and he was really just acted like a gentleman. I got pregnant and I was only so young and he was so young, and I had a very sheltered upbringing, and the only thing to do was to get married, wasn't it? You had to get married in those days. He was actually made up. He said, I'm going to really settle down now. His mum and dad used to say, I was so happy he was going to get married to you, because he's going to settle down and keep out of trouble and everything. Which he did do for a couple of years. He started to go out on drinking binges. He'd go out in the evening and not come back for about 4 or 5 days. He'd just completely disappear, and I wouldn't know where he was. Then he'd come back after about 5 days, and I'd say, oh, where have you been? And he'd say, oh, I've been to my friends. I had a bad hangover. It's taken me 5 days to get over my hangover. It was just sort of really drifting apart. We used to row all the time, and in fact, he was hardly ever at home then. And I know now that this is when he was planning the robbery that he went away for, when he was on his drinking binges.
At 21, Charlie took part in an armed robbery on a garage in Cheshire with 3 other men. He carried the gun, and although no shots were fired, he was sentenced to 7 years imprisonment.
He was taken down in the cells in Chester, and I went down. They allowed me down there to see him. I went with my sister, and he just said to me, don't worry, Mum, he says, I'll soon be out. And he was absolutely devastated. And so was I couldn't talk. Well, the solicitors did say that if he behaved himself, he should be out in just over 3 years.
Charlie found prison impossible to cope with. Within 6 months, he was taking his frustrations out on other inmates. A lifer, jailed for strangling his girlfriend and attacking his daughter, ended up with a broken nose and ribs. A few days later, Charlie attacked a man he believed was a grass. Next, he assaulted 2 prison officers with a stick. For that, he was given a beating, thrown into solitary confinement, and 6 months were added to his sentence. It was the beginning of a pattern that would last to this day.
Prisons ain't nice places. There's a lot of low-life people falling for drugs, mugging old women, rape, ponces.
For Irene, it was all too much.
This life's not for me. He's not going to get out. We'd be getting divorced. If he wasn't in prison, we'd be getting divorced anyway, so what's the point? So I thought, well, no, I'll have to divorce him.
Charlie's spiral of violence continued. He repeatedly glassed another inmate in the face. The man had infuriated him by banging on his ceiling from the cell above. At this time, Charlie was in prison with armed robber Frank Cook.
In them particular days, Charlie wasn't a very big talker anyway. He was a rather sensitive young man. One of his own enemies was himself, fear of just being normal. I would say at that particular time he was over-controlled, which was to his detriment and to his mental health and quality of life within the prison system.
Charlie was literally going out of his mind. Broadmoor Secure Hospital awaited. It was 1979. Here he met fellow patient Chris Reed.
He was a very thoughtful person, very considerate. He genuinely cared about people. When he first went to Broadmoor, he was okay. He just went downhill because they put him on drugs. All they're interested in doing is controlling you by either two ways, by physical or mental. And they control you mentally by giving you drugs.
1 month, and he seemed all right. The next month we went, he'd put on nearly 3 stone, where they were pumping drugs into him. He didn't even look like my son when we got there. He was drugged all the time. We just couldn't even understand his letters sometimes.
He used to talk about having the drugs, and he used to say that if he didn't have them willingly, then they'd make him take them. So he didn't really have a lot of choice. And half the time he was drugged up anyway when they were giving him the next lot. He didn't even have the heart to fight back.
Charlie became no stranger to what was known as the liquid cosh, the drug Largactil.
Largactil is horrific side effects. You can seize up on it, all your body seizes up. You can become paralysed on it. You can get lockjaw. You're eating all the time.
Some of them used to give him fits and make him wet himself and things like that. They were really awful things that they used to do to him.
Charlie found it difficult to mix with most of the other Broadmoor patients. One day, whilst watching television, one of them began staring at him.
I said, look, what do you want, mate? He said, I wondered if you could do us a favour. Straight away I thought, homosexuality. And I was sitting next to Ronnie Craig. Ronnie's digged me in the ribs. He says, watch him, he's a nutter. So I said, come on then. I said, what do you want? He said, I wondered if you'd hit me. I said, what are you talking about? You want me to hit you? He says, well, I like people to hit me. So I've caught him a peach of a right-hander on the chin. As he's going down, I've caught him with a left, a right, an upper and another right. I've sparked him out. He's out cold. And as he's coming round, he went, ooh, ooh, that was lovely. He lost 3 teeth. I fractured his cheekbone and he had 12 stitches in his right eye. He was in a bit of a state.
A rooftop protest by a patient at Broadmoor Top Security Hospital in Berkshire. The man has been shouting complaints about hospital conditions, and it's understood he wants to be transferred to a hospital in Liverpool.
In his desperation to get out of Broadmoor, Charlie became the first man to make it onto the roof in 100 years.
He had 3 rooftop protests about conditions, about him wanting to move out of there. He just had enough. The way he's been treated with drugs, how they confined him and they kept him in conditions which were bad. And he just said he wanted out. That's what he wanted. He wanted to get out of Broadmoor.
I know at one time his brother and his father turned up to beg him to come down, and it broke their hearts, and it broke his heart as well, seeing them, because as they walked away, you could see, you know, his dad's shoulders were slumped and everything, and he was really upset about it, and it just broke everyone's heart, I think, to see him up there.
Eventually, Charlie was moved from Broadmoor. Back in the mainstream prison system, his attacks continued. It meant more long periods of solitary confinement.
If you take somebody from an actual cage, 23 hours a day, and then stick him outside in the community, just drop him outside the gate and say, get on with it, who's going to survive? Who's going to be able to cope with that?
But that's exactly what happened to Charlie in 1987, having served what should have been 3 years, but in fact became 14. A free man again, he went to stay with his parents in Aberystwyth.
Once he saw the sea, he brought all his kit with him for training, because he was a bit fanatic for training. And he used to run along the beach about 6 o'clock in the morning. He really enjoyed it, but he says, no way could I live here, because it was so small. He didn't like people walking behind his back because he'd been stabbed in prison by someone in the back. My husband took him over to this pub and he went up to the bar and the man said how much the round was. He didn't have a clue what to give that man because he didn't know the money. He didn't know how people dressed. He'd never seen traffic like the traffic that was about today. In fact, I think one of the warders said to him when he left that prison that day, "We'll see you soon." He knew that Michael wasn't ready for the outside world.
Charlie stayed in Aberystwyth for just 5 days before going to London. Superfit and charged with pent-up anger, he decided his future was in boxing.
OK, can we have a big hand, please, for Charles Bronson? What a great man!
His coach gave him the fight name Charles Bronson after the actor. Although Charlie had never seen a Bronson film, it was a name that would stick. What Charlie lacked in style, he made up for with aggression.
End of round one. End of round one.
But his lack of control proved too much of a handful, even in the boxing ring. This bout only went to 3 rounds before he was disqualified. He did win a few fights, but the prize money didn't go far. Charlie was broke.
The door opened, and this very large guy came into the shop. Rather a swarthy character with a moustache. And he strode to the counter in a fairly purposeful way. And when he got to the counter, he didn't stop. As he came through the gap in the counter, before the gun started to peer out of the waistband, I realized we had serious trouble. Well, he was extremely aggressive and agitated. People like him think that a jeweler's safe is probably like an Aladdin's cave, which, when opened, will spill its contents almost onto the floor like an Alibaba cartoon. But of course, the vast majority of the stock's in the windows. And it's not in the safe till we close. I said there was no money in the safe, that it was all in the till. He grabbed that and turned to the door, it was gone. He's an extremely large individual and could have probably blown all of us over, particularly me.
Charlie got away with jewellery worth around £1,000, but he was no more able to pull off a successful robbery than cope with life on the outside. It didn't take long for the police to catch up with him. After just 69 days of freedom, he was back behind bars.
Newspaper. I don't know what's happening in the world. They're cutting me off from my family. I'm fucking lost.
After his 69-day spell of freedom, Charlie was back in a cell, lonely and isolated, and feeling the need for friends on the outside. He began writing to a friend, Kelly Ann Cook, who he had met during his release. She paid regular visits to him in prison.
You have to be more perfect than perfect with him. And you have to be perfect in his eyes. You mustn't have any foibles, whatever. You don't smoke. You don't drink. You always wear dresses. You never wear jeans. You have to be absolutely perfect.
But in Charlie's eyes, Kellyanne was perfect enough.
And then one day, he said, "You know, I love you, princess." I said, "Yeah." We're all coy. And he said, "Yeah, I really, really love you. I should have seen it before."
He got involved with a girl called Kellyanne, which I think didn't help him one little bit.
And then he kissed me. And he'd only ever kissed me on the cheek before. He kissed me on the mouth. In public, sort of.
I think it played with his mind a little bit, because he wasn't used to relationships for a start. And I don't think she was the best person to have a relationship with at that time for him.
He asked me, would I marry him? And he'd smuggled in a ring for me. And he put it on my finger. It was a wedding ring. That's the ring.
The marriage never took place. However, Charlie wasn't without other female admirers.
He's told me he's been engaged to about 4 different women during this time he's been inside. All he's done is written to women, and they've written back to him, professed their love and all this and that, and he's took it all, you know, all for granted and thought, oh, everything's going to be lovely, I'll get engaged to this one. And then, of course, like, so many months down the line, after he sent them a ring and all that, they don't want him. I think half of them just like the thought of being with someone that's got a name for themselves, and I think he's very vulnerable.
The prison system was unable to contain or control Charlie. Increasingly desperate, his protests and attacks were becoming more extreme. In Belmarsh prison, 3 Iraqi hijackers just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
I think the bloke was a London bloke that he was after, and he'd given Mick a load of abuse from his cell, and Mick swore then, like, you know, if I ever get hold of him, I'm going to take him hostage and make him take his words back. And he happened to be with the Iraqis when he went to take him hostage, so he had to take them all.
I used to love my toes being tickled, especially by the rain. So I took my boots off, untied one of the Iraqis, put a rope round his neck, and I told him, tickle me toes, or I'll snap your spinal cord. And it was lovely. Brought back sweet memories.
Typically for Charlie, the 7-hour incident had almost comic irony.
He thought it was quite funny because the Iraqis come over and they took hostages on the plane and they come for asylum and all that, and he said, and they end up in a madman's cave, like, you know, with me.
But the siege meant another 7-year sentence for Charlie.
Always look on the bright side of life. Always look on the bright side of death. Always look on the bright side of an apple pie.
Hostage-taking became a regular habit for Charlie. At one prison, he even took the governor victim.
The governor from Park Lane was on the phone, and he said, like, will you please speak to him? He's taken me hostage. And I spoke to Mick, and I just said to him, let that man go now. And he says, well, I want you to come and see me. And I said, no, I'm not coming unless you let that man go. So he let him go. But I think that was just a cry for help. He's never told me why he'd done it, but something obviously upset him, and he just wanted to see me. I didn't go. I wrote and told him off.
By now, Charlie's fearsome reputation was known throughout the prison system. It took at least 6 men to guard him on what was known as a riot unlock. Most of his time was spent in solitary confinement, where to date he's clocked up 22 years. In this regime, prisoners have to show they can behave before they're allowed back into the normal system.
The daily routine in solitary confinement is very easy to describe. It just consists of 23, often 24 hours a day, locked in a cell.
Mark Leach, a former armed robber, spent nearly 20 years in prison and knows what it's like to be in total isolation in the block.
It was only when I was in solitary confinement that I used to understand why the lion paces his cage. Not because he wants to look about, it's because he's bored off his head. It's because he's got nothing else to do, he's got no stimulus. So you pace up and down, and you get to the point where you do it with your eyes closed. That's the way that you survive. You walk up and down yourself for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours, day after day after day.
There's all kind of psychological torture and warfare going on in a segregation unit. It's a world upon itself. I mean, your average inmate's not fully versed with the reality of what goes on in the segregation unit.
Behind those 3 closed doors, the reality is that they can do what the hell they like, and nobody seems to ask any questions.
They would kick your door at night time excessively as you're going to sleep. As a Category A prison, you have the light on all the time. Turn the light off and on, bang your flap. Their job was to make life as uncomfortable as possible and to break you, basically.
Some people see me in these glasses and they might think that I'm wearing them to be flash, be different or whatever, but I don't. I feel like I've had 22 years in solitary. My fucking eyes are so sensitive to light, you just don't realise it, and I get a lot of headaches.
Oh, you lose your head. The wall's closing on you. You get thorough headaches. You sometimes collapse with a state of mental exhaustion and anxiety. You become totally numb and alienated towards yourself as well as others. You lose your perception of reality, and then after a while you become accustomed to it. And then the more damaging side of the effect is that you need the block. The block becomes somewhat of a cocoon for you. It's far easier to curl up into a ball in that little cell and pretend the world don't exist. You get to a peak where really you don't mind the door not being open and just shove my food under the door if necessary. You don't wish to see other human beings because it's all a very, very strange and painful process.
The dangers are that you risk creating a person 3 or 4 times as dangerous as the one you put in there.
I've got months and months and months without seeing the sky, or having a kind word, or a nice thought. I've laughed so much, I've got into a fit of madness. But there's no more pain. There's just an empty hole.
In solitary, Charlie has spent countless hours bodybuilding. He often does thousands of press-ups in a day and could do 25 with 2 men on his back. Over the years, not all prison officers have treated Charlie badly. At Belmarsh Prison, where Jim Dawkins worked, they decided to relax his regime.
When I first heard that Charlie was coming to Belmarsh, we just expected to be going home every night with broken noses and black eyes. We found a different side of the man. Initially, when he arrived, we gave him 1 hour's exercise a day, which is the right of every prisoner, really. We began to play badminton, Scrabble, helped him train with Bertha, his medicine ball. He really was quite intelligent and witty, and he had the decency, really, to treat us like individuals. He never threatened us at all. So I just felt, and certainly the other guys felt, that he deserved that decency back from us as well. I've seen various officers that would have claimed to have been involved in beating Charlie up, and because Charlie was held on this sort of pedestal where he was classed as the most dangerous prisoner in the system, obviously you get your macho men who decide that they want to knock him off there. The stories that I've heard range from him actually getting his moustache ripped out in one prison. He's received broken fingers from officers stamping or kicking him on his hands, using batons to break or to attempt to break his hands or fingers. He's been kicked in the testicles, bitten, pretty much everything really that you could think of. But obviously Charlie was always outnumbered, sort of at least 5-6 to 1.
The prison strategy is to move Charlie regularly. Jim Dawkins accompanied him from Belmarsh to Bristol.
When we arrived at Bristol, there was a heavy amount of prison officers waiting at the segregation unit, what looked like the biggest screws in the prison at the time. We were told we're not having any of that soft routine that you had with him up there. He's going to be in the box 23 hours a day and that's it. He always makes the effort to take 1 step forward and then the system seems to push him back 2 steps. I felt sad, really, that we'd left him in those sort of conditions again.
Another source of sympathy for Charlie was a psychiatrist who had been invited by the governor of Parkhurst to study the prison's hard core of disruptive inmates. He was Dr. Bob Johnson.
We had a very good session. I think we established a relationship then where he began to trust me and started discussing some of the roots of his emotional problems. I discussed his childhood influences because the approach I have to violent and dangerous individuals is that the roots of the violence and the danger and the risk comes from their childhood experiences.
Charlie wrote to Dr. Johnson for help.
Here he sees that what he does is what he does not want to do. He does not want to suffer from these outbursts, these tantrums. And he knows that if he takes the steps that he wishes to take, these will cut down. This will help him. He writes to me like this. I write to the Home Secretary and I get nowhere. The reason they deny me access to Charlie is it's actually what I'm doing is ideologically opposed to what they're doing.
For Dr. Johnson, the answer is therapy.
At the moment, what are they doing? More and more repression, more and more restriction, more and more destruction of human rights, of his dignity, of his self-esteem, more and more destruction. It's appalling.
He is convinced his work with other inmates like Charlie has been a success.
The evidence that the authorities should take into account is the evidence from the special unit I worked at in Parkhurst, in Sea Wing. There, the incidence of violence went right down from 1 every 2 months to 1 every 2 years. That's over 95% reduction in violence. I read the papers where he comes up to these problems, he trashes his cell, or he takes a kidnapping, or something, and he's going to kill somebody, or he's going to kill himself. This is a risk. Now, if I got access to him and we could work on these emotional problems, this risk would evaporate.
When Charlie was jailed in 1974, he soon lost contact with his ex-wife Irene and small child Michael. Irene decided it was best to keep the true identity of Michael's father a secret from him.
I never said anything at all about his dad. He never asked. If he'd have asked, maybe I would have done, but he never asked. But apparently he used to talk to his sister quite often about his dad. But he didn't like to say anything to me in case he upset me, because I'd made a new life, I had a new family, and it was a long time ago. But obviously, he was, was really playing on his mind all the time. He's always had a chip on his shoulder about it.
In 1998, Charlie asked childhood friend Ray Williams to find his son for him. Ray, who still knows Charlie as Mickey Peterson, tracked down Irene and phoned her.
It's understandable, really, why he wants to get in touch. He's been 23 years. He's worried about his lad. He really would like to get in touch with his lad. I said, all he wants to do is know how his son is. I said, and if you could pass the message on to his son, if he doesn't want to know about his dad, nothing else will be mentioned about it.
When Ray phoned up, I used to have nightmares about it, because when I divorced Mick, it was a very long time ago, years and years and years, a lifetime away. I'd had no contact whatsoever with him. I didn't know anything about him other than what I'd read in the papers. And the papers were saying that he's like Hannibal Lecter and he was a maniac and he was mad and all sorts of things. And it's frightening. You believe them, you think, oh, he must be like that now.
Michael arranged to go with Ray to meet his father in Wakefield Prison.
I've read about him in the past and I thought, what a nutter, I was so nervous, it was unbelievable. So we got in the car and it took about 2 hours to get there. And the feelings that were going through me were crazy, like, will I like him, will he get on, what's he look like, and is he really as mad as what everyone thinks he is?
It was just unbelievable, the look on both the faces.
I couldn't believe it, the size of him and that, and I just first thing I'd done was started crying. And I jumped over to him, ran up to him, a big cuddle and that, and even he was crying, under his shades.
It was such an emotional time. And his dad was so proud to see his lad, and young Michael was so made up to see his dad after 23 years.
he was such a nice person, you know. And I thought, what is he doing in there, you know, after all these years?
Travelling back in the car, young Michael, he was actually crying. I mean, he was just couldn't believe, you know, he'd met his dad.
I said to him, I'll keep out of trouble if you keep out of trouble and that, and it did, it kept me out of trouble, do you know what I mean? Because I think I was going to head that the same way myself.
I know now that he's not this maniac that the papers make out, because I read his letters that he sends to Mike. I know he's not like that at all. It's just all the press.
Charlie had promised Michael that he would stay out of trouble, but his darkest hour was yet to come.
Space.
Andy Jones runs the controversial Crime Through Time Museum in Newent, near Gloucester.
This is the Black Museum of Gloucestershire, regarded by many as being politically incorrect. It touches on many taboo subjects. Can you believe, for example, that is a genuine Ku Klux Klan outfit for a 3 to 4-year-old? I believe that the Crime Through Time Museum houses the largest private Holocaust collection in the world. Pride of place in this part of the museum must go to the celebrity figure Charles Bronson. On display there are several items, including his fob watch on display, which was given to him from the legendary figure of Ronnie Cray.
Charlie has become an international crime biz star. Crime biz means that people don't go around shooting people in the heads anymore, they go around shooting films. Charlie is a winner, and Charlie is a marketable commodity. We've got the books about Charlie, we've got the pens, we've got merchandise that includes posters, hats, videos, we've got CD-ROMs, we've got floppy disks, we've got the film coming out, and we've got music CDs.
For a man that has spent in excess of 23 years in solitary confinement, he's been gifted with exceptional strengths.
Charlie is everybody's hero in one way or another, and even if it means anti-hero. We'd all like to be able to get into a cell with a paedophile for half an hour and give them what for. There'd be nothing better than going in there with a baseball bat, you know, getting a paedophile's hand, putting it on a concrete plinth and giving it what for. But come to that, who would actually do that? No one. They'd all bottle out. But when Charlie does that, they say, yeah, that's right, Charlie's done one over. Charlie's kicked a paedophile's door in, a cell door, steel door. But the authorities then go, oh, Charlie's a nasty character, let's put this propaganda out here about Charlie and let's make him look bad.
We have other certificates, for example, which show that he lifted weights with his beard. There's a certificate of having done 1,790 sit-ups in 1 hour with a medicine ball.
The general public are interested in Charlie because of something called curiosity. We're all curious of what goes on somewhere that we can't get at. If it was Charlie here now, talking about himself, about his life, who might be interested in that? They may just go, well, yes, we've heard it all before, this con and that ex-con and so on. But because they haven't allowed Charlie to talk, because Charlie is inaccessible, Charlie, to some extent, may be a myth. And people are intrigued by that.
There's many, many stories. Jan Lamb was reported as having said that she had the greatest lay that she's ever had from Charles Bronson, 10 times a night with the hardest man in Britain.
When Charlie's released, take it from me, I think we'll have newspapers, we'll have TV shows fighting over that man for the first 6 months to get him on the show, and I think that there'll be an open checkbook there for him
But for now, that checkbook remains firmly closed. In January last year, Phil Danielson was a local authority teacher working with inmates in a unit at Hull Prison where Charlie was being kept.
I heard the door open, and the next thing I knew, I was on the floor. I knew I'd been thumped. And really, it wasn't until I heard the voice of the person who'd done it that I knew it was Bronson. I soon became aware that all these brave prison officers had scarpered pretty quickly, and I later found out that the other 5 or 6 inmates that were on that wing had actually gone into their cells and plotted themselves in. Fairly shortly after that would trash the entire place. I believe we were talking about something like £500,000 worth of damage. And he spent a good half an hour to an hour totally trashing. If it moved, he trashed it. And that only added to my fear, because can you imagine the noise? Probably the first 3 hours were the most frightening time, when I was tied up and I thought he was going to kill me. Definitely thought he was going to kill me. I knew how physically powerful he was. I knew he could probably kill me with one blow. He actually physically picked me up above his head, that's how strong he is, and lifted me and put me onto the snooker table in the middle of the wing. And you've got to bear in mind that while he was doing this, he was like screaming like a banshee. I'm talking here about a guy that can physically pick up a very large fridge freezer and throw it up a staircase on his own. He taped or tied the big kitchen knife to the end of a pool cue, which effectively made it into a spear. He said, "You keep quiet," not that I was making any noise anyway, because this knife, take your last breath because this knife's going in you. Have you heard of a movie called Dead Men Walking? He sit and forced me to watch Dead Men Walking, which is, as I'm sure you know, it's Susan Sarandon and the guy who used to be married to Madonna. It's about a guy who's on death row. Well, not the most, it's hardly a Hollywood musical. It's not like somebody popping on The Sound of Music to cheer everybody up. You know, it's hardly sort of, and all Bronson could say is, "It's a really good film, that is. Really good film, you know." And I thought, yeah, I know why you're doing that. I thought, you've got a cruel streak. It's not just, oh, poor Charlie, you've got a cruel streak. Because you can imagine how I felt having to watch that thing. Having, you know, been tied to a chair in front of the television, told to watch it, and he stood behind me, chuckling away at it. He took great pride at one point in saying that I was the only one of his hostages who hadn't physically shit himself. And he really admired me for that. So if your goal in life is to get ordinary, humane people to physically shit themselves, well, I'm sorry, but there's something not quite right. It said that he'd taken me hostage because I was the bastard who'd slagged off his artwork. And actually, that is not true. It never was true. We started on his demands. We're going to Cuba on a helicopter. We wanted a helicopter to go to Cuba. I think some sort of machine guns, which I think he'd seen in some film.
But eventually, Charlie agreed to surrender himself, provided he was allowed to see his solicitor and that there would be no punishment beating from officers. Bizarrely, however, he wanted to extend the siege for a second night.
He knew that if it went on for 44 hours, that it would be like the longest, and he was looking for the record breaker. That's why he did another night. It changed absolutely nothing. 9:30 on the Wednesday morning, he said, "I want you to march in parallel with me, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, up and down, up and down." And he said, at 10 o'clock, he said, "You just carry on walking." It got to 10 o'clock. I just bolted. I absolutely bolted for that gate. I like to walk on the beach because it was an image that all the time I was held hostage that I kept conjuring up. I just imagined myself walking on the beach. About 6 months after the incident, I suppose I had what would be commonly termed a nervous breakdown. I'm diagnosed with having post-traumatic stress disorder. The end of the siege was only the beginning. It's still going on. You know, a career I loved is ruined, and I don't know whether I'm going to be able to work. Lots of people who've been through ordeals like this are changed completely because they are damaged. And In a sense, that's what I am. I'll never be the same again.
In February this year, Charles Bronson went to trial for the siege. Having sacked his lawyers, he attempted to defend himself. Shortly before the trial, he rehearsed his plea to the jury over the phone to a friend. His defense was that the system was to blame, because prison had created him.
How would you feel waking up in the morning without a window? My window is a steel grid, and I have to put my lips against that steel grid and suck in air. I've done nothing on this planet to deserve that. My bed is 4 inches off the floor. It's a concrete bed. Now, if that's right, then be so. But let somebody else have a fucking go at it. Because I've had 26 years of this bollocks, and it's time to come out. But I'm not living. I'm existing. Thank you.
Although nobody knows what is in your mind, your victims all have the same fear, that they're about to lose their lives. You're dangerous and unpredictable, especially when you're upset and angry. Whilst there may not be any mental illness, there is clearly a continuing problem. The community at large, whether on the outside or in prison, deserves some protection from you. I consider that you will continue to be a danger, which is why I have to pass a sentence of life imprisonment.
Charlie will not be eligible to apply for parole before 2010. By then, he will be 57 years old.
When is this torture going to stop? And how on earth can we ever consider releasing him unless he's been graced with the opportunity to rehabilitate himself and address his offending behaviour and come home?
I think that the system has got a great deal to answer for. I think the public needs educating and the politicians need educating. Prison is well known to be an expensive way of making people worse.
Very disappointed in him. I've been very, very hurt. Something I'll never, ever forget. But he's still my son.
I'm gonna survive. I'm gonna win. I'm gonna get out. I'm gonna be free. I wanna be free. Some people might think I'm institutionalised. Some people might think, Charlie's been in there too long. They probably say he loves it in prison. Well, I fucking don't love it in prison. I want to go home.